The HOA president stood on my grandmother's porch, waving eviction papers and smirking like she'd just won the lottery. What she didn't know? I owned the lake she was staring at, and the only parking lot her precious neighborhood could use. I'm Ezra, and 3 months ago I thought I was about to lose everything my family built. This woman, Brenna Caldwell, had decided my rustic cabin was an eyesore that didn't belong in her perfect little community. She gave me 72 hours to pack up and leave the home my grandmother left me, or face legal action. But here's the thing about bullies. They never do their homework. And Brenna, she picked the wrong fight with the wrong family. What would you do if some power-hungry neighbor tried to steal your family's legacy? Drop your revenge ideas below. And where are you watching from? I bet your HOA horror stories are just as wild. Share them in the comments. Let me take you back to where this war started. 2 years ago, I inherited my grandmother Opal's lakefront cabin after she passed at 91. This wasn't some fancy vacation home. It was a sturdy sanctuary built in 1963 from local cedar, where 3 generations of my family had found peace. Opal always chuckled and called it her worthless swamp land, winking like she was sharing the world's best inside joke. I used to think it was just her humble way. Turns out grandmother was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. After my divorce imploded my corporate life, I traded my downtown consulting office for remote tech work and actual sanity. The cabin sits on what the tax records claimed was 2.3 acres of pine forest and marsh. Every dawn brought the haunting call of loons echoing across mirror-still water. I'd sip coffee watching prehistoric blue herons stalk fish in the shallows, their movements so deliberate they seemed choreographed. Evenings found me on the weathered dock, bare feet dangling in water so clear you could count stones 20 feet down. Those old dock planks, worn silk smooth by decades of family gatherings, felt like coming home to myself. But paradise always attracts parasites. 3 years ago, developer Randy Morrison finished Lakeshore Estates, 47 identical McMansions that sprouted around our lake like some suburban infection. Most new neighbors were decent people, retirees escaping city noise, young families chasing the same peace I'd found. But every neighborhood gets its dictator, and ours came wearing designer tennis whites. Brenna Caldwell arrived from some cookie-cutter suburb in her spotless BMW, looking like she'd stepped off a country club magazine cover. Within 6 months, she'd anointed herself queen of the Waterfront Improvement Committee. Her reign of terror started with the sweet, elderly Kowalskis, who got slammed with a $300 fine for refusing to paint their charming garden shed bureaucratic beige. Then she targeted Vietnam veteran Chuck Martinez, demanding he remove his unauthorized American flagpole or face $50 daily until compliance. The sound of her designer heels clicking across pavement became our neighborhood's air raid siren. We'd hear that sharp click, 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 and know someone was about to get a lecture about maintaining property values and community standards. 18 months ago, the HOA officially formed when Morrison sold his final lots. That's when Brenna revealed her true ambition: total control. She convinced 5 spineless board members to retroactively claim authority over all waterfront properties, including my grandmother's cabin that predated their plastic kingdom by 40 years. I remember thinking how my Uncle Morris, the retired real estate lawyer, always warned that HOAs could claim jurisdiction they didn't legally possess if nobody challenged them. The woman actually had the brass to claim authority over land that was catching fish before she was catching boys at high school dances. The harassment escalated like a bad fever. Monthly bills for $300 in mandatory community fees. Certified letters demanding $1,200 in architectural review penalties because my cabin's honest cedar siding wasn't approved suburban beige vinyl. I tossed them in my fireplace, figuring any competent lawyer would laugh these demands into next week. My grandmother's place had been grandfathered in since the Johnson administration, or so I thought. I'd never actually verified what legal protections inheritance properties carried. But Brenna doesn't take no for an answer. She hired some ambulance-chasing attorney who probably got his degree from a Cracker Jack box, filed bogus liens against my property. When that failed, she had the audacity to research my divorce records, painting me as some unstable drifter who posed a threat to community harmony. The neighborhood fractured like thin ice. Brenna's compliance cult had maybe 12 hardcore believers, people so desperate for suburban perfection they'd sell their souls for matching mailboxes. Another 18 residents quietly supported me but stayed silent after watching Brenna destroy the Kowalskis and Chuck. The rest just wanted peace and couldn't understand why anyone cared if my cabin looked rustic instead of ridiculous. Then came that crisp Tuesday morning when Brenna strutted up my front steps, designer heels drumming against grandmother's time-worn pine boards like a war march. She clutched those eviction papers like Moses carrying tablets, her expensive perfume failing to mask the stench of pure entitlement. Standing there watching this tennis outfit tyrant lecture me about standards on land my family had claimed before she was born, I remembered grandmother's mysterious smile whenever she'd mention her worthless swampland. Time to discover what she'd really left me. The next morning, I stood in my kitchen watching Brenna's BMW gleaming in what everyone assumed was the community parking lot, sipping coffee that tasted like liquid vengeance. This woman had seriously underestimated who she was messing with. Within 12 hours of delivering her eviction ultimatum, Brenna had already gone nuclear. She'd filed a formal complaint with county code enforcement, claiming my grandmother's old workshop was an unpermitted structure posing immediate safety hazards. The workshop that had weathered 57 winters, while these McMansions were already showing foundation cracks after 3 years. But that was just her opening move. Saturday night at the Hendersons' barbecue, I watched Brenna work the crowd like a politician at a fundraiser. The smoky scent of grilling burgers mixed with her toxic gossip as she held court near the potato salad, spinning tales about my erratic behavior and complete disregard for community safety. "We simply cannot allow one selfish individual to destroy what we've all invested in," she announced, dabbing mustard from her lips like she was cleaning blood from a blade. Her voice carried that particular tone of righteous authority that makes normal people want to throw things. Then came her digital warfare campaign. Brenna posted a manifesto on our neighborhood Facebook group about protecting our shared values and property investments. She'd included photos of my cabin shot from deliberately unflattering angles, with captions like, "When community cooperation breaks down," and "Why architectural standards matter." Her post got 3 likes from her compliance cult members and 47 eye-roll emojis from everyone else. But the poison was spreading. That's when something my Uncle Morris had mentioned during last Christmas dinner clicked into focus. He'd been telling stories about property law cases, mentioning how old waterfront properties often carried legal protections that most people never bothered to research. "Smart property owners always verify their rights before surrendering to bullies," he'd said, raising his whiskey glass. "Knowledge is the best weapon against injustice." Monday morning found me in the county courthouse basement, surrounded by the musty perfume of decades-old files and the fluorescent hum of bureaucratic purgatory. I was hunting for something specific, any legal protections my grandmother's property might carry that could trump Brenna's manufactured authority. Dorothy, the filing clerk who'd been sorting deeds since the Carter administration, became my archaeological guide through layers of property history. "Honey, most folks never look past their tax records," she said, pulling thick folders with the efficiency of someone who'd done this dance 10,000 times. "But old waterfront properties, they're like vintage wine. Sometimes they get better with age." What I discovered made my heart race like I'd struck gold. My property carried something called established riparian rights, dating back to the original 1891 homestead patent. These weren't just abstract legal concepts. They meant my family held special privileges regarding water access that couldn't be overridden by newcomer regulations or HOA demands. Even better, every structure on my land predated current zoning by decades, protecting them under grandfather clause provisions that made them legally untouchable. But here's where Dorothy dropped the real bombshell that changed everything. "Sweetie, this legal description is interesting," she said, squinting at faded ink through her reading glasses. "Your property line extends much further east than what's showing on modern tax maps. See this notation here? It references a 1962 boundary survey that includes an additional 200 feet of land area." My blood turned to ice water as the implications hit me. "What's 200 feet east of my cabin?" Dorothy smiled like she was delivering the world's best Christmas present. "According to this, it would include that gravel parking area your neighbors use. The one everyone thinks belongs to the community." The mini twist hit like a lightning bolt. Brenna had been threatening to evict me from my own property while her entire neighborhood trespassed on my land daily. I photocopied every document with shaking hands, my mind racing through the possibilities. If these boundaries were accurate, every single car in that community parking lot was sitting on my private property, including Brenna's precious BMW. Uncle Morris's law office still smelled like leather chairs and 40 years of legal victories when I burst through his door an hour later. His weathered face lit up as he spread my documents across his desk like a general planning the perfect battle. "Ezra, my boy," he said, adjusting glasses that had seen 3 decades of David versus Goliath fights. "Your grandmother was even smarter than I thought. This Brenna character just picked a fight with the wrong family." He traced the property lines with his finger, decades of experience reading legal descriptions like sheet music. "If these boundaries are accurate, your HOA problem just became their parking problem. But we need an updated survey to confirm this before we drop any bombshells." Driving home past that parking lot, watching Brenna's BMW sparkle in the afternoon sun on what might be my land, I couldn't stop grinning. She wanted to play legal hardball with my family's legacy. Game on. Brenna didn't waste time licking her wounds. By Wednesday morning, she'd called an emergency HOA meeting for Friday evening, complete with official notices slapped on every mailbox like eviction warrants. The agenda read like a declaration of war, addressing non-compliant properties and immediate community safety concerns. But her real masterstroke came Thursday afternoon when she launched a door-to-door propaganda campaign, her designer heels clicking across driveways like a metronome of manipulation. I watched from my kitchen window as she worked the neighborhood with military precision, clipboard clutched like a weapon, selling fear to anyone desperate enough to buy it. "We need to show unity," I heard her tell the Petersons, her voice dripping that artificial sweetness that makes your skin crawl. "If we don't act decisively, property values will crater. Do you really want your retirement nest egg destroyed by one selfish holdout who thinks rules don't apply to him?" By evening, she'd collected signatures from 23 households supporting immediate and aggressive legal action to protect our shared investment. The acrid smell of neighbor versus neighbor warfare hung over our little paradise like smoke from a house fire. That's when I decided to stop playing defense and start hunting for ammunition. Grandmother's basement had always been forbidden territory during family visits, stuffed with what she dismissively called old paperwork and ancient history. But grief makes you brave, and impending eviction makes you desperate. I descended into that cedar-scented time capsule armed with nothing but a flashlight and the growing certainty that Opal had been hiding something important. The woman had been a record-keeping savant. Every property tax bill since Kennedy was president, every permit application, every scrap of correspondence with county officials, all organized in chronological perfection inside boxes that smelled like vanilla extract and decades of careful storage. But it was the cedar chest tucked in the corner, locked tighter than Fort Knox, that made my pulse quicken. Inside lay buried treasure that would change everything. The original 1962 property survey, hand-drawn with surveyor's precision and signed by someone named Harrison Pike. This wasn't just any boundary map. This was the master document used to carve my great-grandfather's sprawling homestead into smaller parcels. And according to these measurements, my property didn't end where 47 families assumed it did. My heart hammered against my ribs as I traced the eastern boundary line with a shaking finger. The property extended exactly 247 feet beyond what modern tax maps showed, swallowing a kidney-shaped chunk of land that included every square inch of gravel where the entire neighborhood parked their cars. The revelation hit like cold lake water in winter. For 3 solid years, I'd been watching mass trespassing every single morning without realizing it. Every BMW, every minivan, every work truck that crunched across that gravel lot was sitting on my private property. But 60-year-old surveys might not survive modern legal scrutiny without professional backup. Friday morning found me begging Dylan Pike, Harrison's son who'd inherited the family business, to squeeze in an emergency boundary verification. Dad always said that homestead division created some interesting complications, Dylan told me, loading GPS equipment that looked like it belonged in a NASA mission. His weathered hands moved with the confidence of someone who'd been settling property disputes since he could hold a measuring tape. Original surveys like yours often reveal surprises that got buried when counties went digital in the 90s. 3 hours later, Dylan's space-age equipment confirmed what grandmother's faded ink had claimed. My eastern boundary sliced straight through the heart of community parking. "This is bulletproof," Dylan announced, downloading coordinates that would detonate Brenna's little kingdom. "Your property line cuts right through that parking lot. I'd estimate about 15 prime spots sit entirely on your land, plus the main entrance access road." The mini twist exploded in my brain like a firework. Brenna had spent weeks collecting signatures demanding my eviction while her entire army of supporters committed daily trespassing on my property. But Dylan wasn't finished dropping bombshells. "There's something else your grandmother left you," he said, cross-referencing measurements against historical water records he'd pulled that morning. "This survey includes riparian boundaries that extend into the lake itself. Looks like your family owns more than just the parking lot." He pointed toward the water where a dozen boats bobbed peacefully at their moorings. "See those dock slips everyone's been renting from the HOA? They're sitting in water that legally belongs to you." My mind reeled as the implications crashed over me like a tsunami. Not only did I own the parking lot, I owned the lake bottom where every boat in the neighborhood was anchored. The HOA had been collecting slip fees for 3 years on water that belonged to me. Friday evening arrived heavy with the promise of warfare. The community center crackled with tension as 42 residents squeezed into folding chairs, the air thick with nervous energy and burnt coffee. Brenna commanded the front of the room like a general addressing troops before battle, armed with her petition and delusions of authority. "Tonight, we take our community back," she declared, her voice carrying the kind of righteous fury that starts crusades. I sat in the back row, grandmother's survey burning like dynamite in my lap, watching this woman orchestrate my destruction while literally standing on my stolen land. Time to teach everyone a lesson about doing homework before picking fights. The weekend after Brenna's war council brought psychological warfare that would have made dictators jealous. Saturday morning, I woke to find a Channel 7 news van parked in what I now knew was my parking lot, complete with a blonde reporter practicing her deeply concerned citizen expression in the side mirror. Brenna had weaponized local media, spinning a masterpiece of fiction about a dangerous squatter situation threatening community safety. The reporter, a fresh-faced kid named Jessica who looked like she'd gotten her journalism degree from a Cracker Jack box, devoured every syllable of Brenna's Oscar-worthy performance. "This individual has repeatedly violated community safety standards and shown complete contempt for his neighbor's well-being," Brenna declared to the camera, gesturing toward my cabin like she was identifying a biohazard. The morning breeze carried her voice across the water, poisoning the air with manufactured outrage. But that theatrical performance was just her opening act. Sunday evening delivered the real psychological torture, Brenna's neighborhood safety patrol. 6 clipboard-wielding volunteers began documenting my every breath like I was under federal surveillance, photographing me checking mail, recording timestamps when I left for groceries. The sharp crunch of their footsteps on my gravel driveway became the soundtrack to my personal police state. Monday morning brought her nuclear option, a restraining order petition filed with theatrical flair at the county courthouse. According to her sworn statement, I'd made threatening remarks about property boundaries and exhibited increasingly erratic behavior that endangers community members. The woman had actually convinced 3 neighbors to commit perjury for her crusade. The Williamses, who owed her money from some bogus committee fundraiser, and Mrs. Bennett, who lived in terror of losing her perfect lawn award, had provided sworn statements about my hostile attitude threatening their quality of life and property values. That's when I stopped gathering intelligence and started deploying weapons of mass destruction. During my divorce proceedings, Uncle Morris had taught me the golden rule of legal warfare. When someone builds a case against you, you better build a fortress against them. While Brenna played neighborhood prosecutor, I was researching the one discovery that could obliterate her entire kingdom, who actually owned the lake that gave Lakeshore Estates its multi-million-dollar appeal. The State Water Management Department felt like archaeological expedition headquarters. Endless filing cabinets stretching back generations, staffed by civil servants who'd been tracking water ownership since the Ice Age carved the first lake beds. "Most folks assume all lakes belong to the state," explained Margaret, a 40-year department veteran whose gray hair had witnessed more water rights battles than the Supreme Court. "But lakes can remain privately owned if they meet specific historical criteria and were never formally transferred to public management." What those dusty files revealed made my entire body tremble like I'd grabbed a live electrical wire. Our lake, all 47 crystal-clear acres that every single Lakeshore Estates resident used for swimming, boating, fishing, and bragging to their suburban friends, had never been transferred from private ownership to state control. When my great-grandfather's homestead was divided in 1962, the water rights stayed attached to the main parcel. My parcel. I didn't just own waterfront property, I owned the entire fucking lake. Every morning when neighbors launched their boats, they were trespassing on my water. Every summer evening when families splashed at the community beach, they were swimming in my private lake. Every boat slip fee the HOA had collected for 3 years, $200 monthly per slip times 23 boats times 36 months, That was $165,600 in stolen rental income from water that belonged to me. The mini twist exploded in my brain like a supernova. Brenna wasn't just running a harassment campaign, she was operating an illegal commercial enterprise on my private property. But the water rights documentation revealed something even more devastating to her little empire. The HOA had been advertising boat slips to prospective residents as a premier community amenity included with membership. They'd been using my lake as their primary selling point, inflating property values with my water while simultaneously trying to evict me for being an architectural eyesore. Tuesday afternoon, Dylan and I mapped every square inch of my underwater empire using sonar equipment that looked like it belonged on alien spacecraft. The boundaries were ironclad. I owned every foot of lake bottom, every inch of shoreline except for tiny slivers directly touching other properties. "This is absolutely unprecedented," Dylan said, reviewing measurements that would rewrite our entire community's understanding of reality. "Your grandmother left you control over the one asset this whole neighborhood depends on for their lifestyle, their property values, their entire identity." Wednesday brought Brenna's final desperate escalation. She'd scheduled an emergency community meeting for Friday night, but this time she'd invited County Sheriff Martinez to maintain order during discussions of criminal trespassing charges. The woman was planning to have me arrested at my own kangaroo court trial. Her flyer, distributed like propaganda leaflets to every mailbox, read like a terrorist alert. "Final community meeting regarding dangerous non-compliance. Sheriff's Department will attend to ensure public safety." Thursday evening, I sat on my dock watching sunset paint my lake in shades of gold and crimson, surrounded by boats anchored in my water while cars rested on my land. Tomorrow night, Brenna would attempt to destroy me in front of the entire community. She had absolutely no idea I was about to reveal that I owned everything that made her neighborhood worth living in. Friday morning arrived crackling with electricity, and I knew it was time to unleash the nuclear option. Uncle Morris met me at his office at 7 a.m., the scent of fresh coffee mixing with decades of leather-bound legal victories as I spread my arsenal of documents across his battle-scarred mahogany desk. "Sweet Mother of God, Ezra," he breathed, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he absorbed the magnitude of what grandmother had left me. His 40 years of property law experience had never prepared him for anything this spectacular. Your opal wasn't just smart, she was playing interdimensional chess while everyone else was playing rock, paper, scissors. We spent 3 hours dissecting every document like surgeons, Morris's excitement building with each revelation. His reading glasses fogged with anticipation as he cross-referenced boundary surveys with water rights, his calculator working overtime to quantify the scope of my inheritance. But then he discovered something that made even his seasoned lawyer's composure shatter completely. "Jesus Christ on a pogo stick," he whispered, pulling out receipts and financial records I hadn't even noticed in grandmother's files. "Ezra, the HOA hasn't just been collecting boat slip fees. They've been running a full-scale commercial marina operation on your water." The numbers hit like a financial avalanche. 23 boat slips at $200 monthly for 36 months, $165,600. Annual lake access fees of $50 from all 47 households, $7,050 yearly. Summer day use privileges at $25 per guest family, another $15,000 annually. Premium fishing licenses at $100 each, $4,700 more. We're looking at over $200,000 in unauthorized commercial exploitation of your property, Morris calculated, his pen scratching across legal pads like he was documenting the heist of the century. The musty smell of old law books seemed to intensify with each shocking revelation. In legal terms, that's not just trespassing, that's conversion, unjust enrichment, commercial theft, and potentially criminal fraud. The power dynamic shifted so violently I could feel reality rearranging itself around me. I wasn't some defenseless victim fighting eviction. I was a property owner who just discovered 3 years of systematic theft by an entire community that didn't even realize they were thieves. But Morris was just getting warmed up. "There's something even more devastating," he said, spreading property tax records across his desk like a general planning the perfect siege. "Look at how every single house in Lakeshore Estates has been assessed for tax purposes." His finger traced columns of numbers that told an incredible story of community-wide deception. Every property in the development had received substantial tax reductions for being classified as lakefront community residences with shared water access privileges. The county had been giving residents collective tax breaks worth hundreds of thousands of dollars based on their assumed legal right to use my water. Your neighbors have saved roughly $300,000 collectively in property taxes over 3 years because the county believed they had legitimate lake access, Morris explained, his voice rising with the thrill of discovery. But that access was never legally granted. It was just assumed when the development was platted. The revelation struck like lightning splitting an oak tree. Not only had the HOA stolen massive rental income from my property, but every single neighbor had been fraudulently receiving tax benefits based on water access they had no legal right to claim. I wasn't fighting one delusional HOA president. I was sitting on evidence that could expose an entire community's unwitting participation in tax fraud and property theft. "Here's our battle plan," Morris declared, his strategic mind shifting into full warfare mode. "Tonight, we let Brenna hang herself with her own rope. Then we drop the parking lot bombshell. But we save the lake ownership revelation for the nuclear option, only if she refuses to negotiate reasonably." He leaned forward, 4 decades of David versus Goliath battles gleaming in his eyes like distant lightning. "Because once we reveal you own that lake, everything changes forever. Every property value, every tax assessment, every boat slip, every summer barbecue, it all becomes subject to your personal approval." The crushing weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders. I could obliterate every property value in the neighborhood with one legal filing, or I could use this leverage to build something better for everyone. Grandmother hadn't just left me property, she'd left me the power to reshape an entire community's destiny. The next 6 hours felt like preparing for the legal equivalent of D-Day. Uncle Morris transformed from sleepy, semi-retired country lawyer into a strategic war general, his cluttered office becoming mission control for what he kept calling the most beautiful property rights revenge story of his 40-year career. "Listen up, soldier," Morris barked, pulling out his ancient Rolodex that looked like it had survived 3 wars and a nuclear apocalypse. "We're not just fighting one delusional HOA president tonight, we're establishing a new community power structure. This requires precision, witnesses, and enough legal firepower to make the Supreme Court weep with joy." The acrid smell of fresh ink and nervous excitement filled his office as our first recruit arrived. Dylan burst through the door with surveying equipment that could measure property lines to spacecraft precision, his weathered face glowing with the anticipation of someone about to witness legal history. "I've staked your visible boundaries with orange flags bright enough to be seen from orbit," Dylan announced, spreading official maps across Morris's desk like a general planning the perfect siege. "Anyone driving into that parking lot tonight will see exactly where their trespassing begins. No wiggle room, no confusion, no excuses." But Morris had recruited an even deadlier weapon. Sarah Bennett, his old environmental law colleague, arrived carrying a briefcase that probably contained enough water rights precedents to flood a courtroom. Her smile suggested she lived for exactly these kinds of legal demolition projects. "Private lake ownership cases are rarer than unicorn sightings," Sarah explained, her voice vibrating with the excitement of someone who'd found the holy grail of property law. "When someone controls an entire lake in a residential community, it creates leverage that can reshape everything. You don't just own water, you own the foundation of everyone's property values and lifestyle dreams." Then Garrett knocked on Morris's door, and everything got exponentially more interesting. My quiet neighbor from 3 houses down had been conducting his own surveillance operation that would have impressed the CIA. His garage workshop smelled like sawdust and righteous anger as he revealed boxes of evidence that made my discoveries look like amateur hour. "I've been documenting Brenna's corruption for 8 months, Garrett said, pulling out folders organized with military precision that made my heart race. Financial records, recorded threats, photographs of trespassing incidents, even phone recordings of her admitting to inflating legal costs and skimming HOA funds for personal expenses. The evidence was devastating. Brenna had been claiming her BMW lease payments as community transportation expenses. Her country club membership was filed under professional development for HOA leadership. Last month's supposed $2,400 emergency legal consultation had actually cost the HOA $800, with Brenna pocketing the $1,600 difference. "She's been treating the HOA treasury like her personal ATM," Garrett continued, his quiet voice carrying the cold fury of someone who'd been watching injustice for too long. "I estimate she's embezzled over $15,000 in the past year alone." My chest tightened with a mixture of rage and anticipation. Brenna wasn't just a power-hungry neighbor, She was a common thief who'd been stealing from everyone while playing innocent victim. Morris orchestrated our battle strategy with the precision of someone who'd spent decades turning David into Goliath slayers. I would present the parking lot evidence first, shocking but not nuclear. Sarah would handle water rights law explanations in terms neighbors could understand. Dylan would provide real-time GPS demonstrations that couldn't be argued with. Garrett would document everything while keeping corruption evidence in reserve. Remember the golden rule of legal warfare, Morris coached as we rehearsed our presentation. We're not there to destroy people. We're there to establish justice and offer solutions that benefit everyone except the criminals. The moment we appear vindictive, we lose the moral high ground that makes victory inevitable. During my crash course in property law that afternoon, I'd learned things that every property owner should know, but most never discover. Old properties often have boundaries that differ significantly from tax records. Always get actual surveys, not assumptions. Water rights can be privately owned even when everyone assumes they're public. Research before you pay fees to use water that might belong to someone else. Most importantly, when facing legal harassment, professional documentation and evidence gathering beat emotional reactions every single time. Sarah had researched market rates that would make our settlement offer irresistible. We'd propose parking at $25 monthly per household, below market rate. Lake access at $100 annually per family, an absolute steal. Boat slips at $75 monthly, incredibly generous compared to private marina rates. Your proposal needs to be so reasonable that refusing it makes Brenna look like a psychopath, Sarah advised, running calculations that would make everyone winners except corrupt officials. By 6 p.m., our legal army was locked and loaded. Morris would demolish their authority with property law. Dylan would prove boundaries with GPS precision. Sarah would explain water rights in plain English. Garrett would record everything for potential criminal proceedings. The evening air crackled with electricity as I drove toward the community center, my truck loaded with documents that would detonate Brenna's little empire. Tonight, 47 families would discover who actually owned the paradise they'd been fighting over. Brenna had wanted to destroy my family's legacy with fake legal authority. Time to show her what real legal research looked like. The weekend before our final showdown brought escalation that crossed every line of human decency. Brenna had clearly decided that if legal intimidation wouldn't work, she'd try destroying my reputation and sanity instead. Saturday morning, I discovered she'd hired a private investigator, some sleazy ex-cop named Rick who drove a dented Honda and smelled like cigarettes in desperation. I caught him photographing my cabin from the tree line, probably hoping to find evidence of code violations or dangerous living conditions he could report to the authorities. "Just doing my job, buddy," Rick said when I confronted him, his tobacco-stained grin revealing the moral flexibility that makes private investigators perfect weapons for people like Brenna. Public property, public photography rights. Except he wasn't on public property. He was standing on my land, about 50 feet into the forest that belonged to me according to Dylan's survey. I took photos of him trespassing while he took photos of my supposedly dangerous cabin, creating the kind of mutual surveillance comedy that would have been hilarious if it weren't trying to destroy my life. But Rick's amateur detective work was just the appetizer for Brenna's main course of psychological warfare. Monday brought a visit from the city's code enforcement officer, a tired-looking bureaucrat named Pete, who clearly didn't want to be there. Brenna had filed a complaint claiming my cabin posed immediate health hazards to the surrounding community because of allegedly failing septic systems and unsafe electrical modifications. Pete spent 2 hours crawling around my property with testing equipment, checking every outlet, inspecting every pipe, measuring every structural beam. The thorough inspection that Brenna had hoped would condemn my cabin instead proved it was built to standards that exceeded most modern homes. "Ma'am, I found 0 violations," Pete told Brenna over the phone while standing in my driveway, his voice carrying that special tone government employees use when they're tired of dealing with crazy people. "This property is actually in better condition than most houses half its age. Please don't file any more frivolous complaints. We have real safety issues to address in this county." Brenna's fury at this setback manifested in her most desperate move yet. Tuesday evening, she organized what she called an emergency community safety meeting at her house, inviting the 23 boat owners to discuss protecting their investments from an unstable individual who threatens everyone's property values. The warm glow from her living room windows and the sound of worried voices created an atmosphere that felt like a lynch mob planning session. Through Garrett's intelligence network, he'd befriended several reasonable neighbors who attended Brenna's meetings as double agents. I learned she was spreading rumors about my mental stability and potential for violence. She'd twisted my divorce records into a narrative about dangerous instability and claimed my refusal to comply with HOA demands proved I was potentially unstable and capable of property destruction or worse. "She's basically painting you as the neighborhood psychopath," Garrett reported Wednesday morning, his quiet voice heavy with disgust. "She told everyone you've been making threatening phone calls and talking about destroying property values for revenge." The smear campaign was working. Several neighbors who'd previously been neutral started avoiding eye contact when I checked my mail. Mrs. Patterson hurried her grandchildren inside when I walked to my dock. Even Chuck Martinez, the veteran who'd been targeted by Brenna's harassment before me, seemed hesitant to wave his usual friendly greeting. But while Brenna was busy poisoning minds, I was quietly preparing nuclear weapons she couldn't even imagine. I'd installed security cameras around my property perimeter, hidden among trees and under eaves where they could document every trespassing incident, every threatening gesture, every moment of harassment. The high-definition footage of neighbors parking on my land, walking across my boundaries, and using my lake access created an ironclad legal record that would demolish any claims about who was violating whose rights. Dylan had spent Tuesday afternoon conducting what he called forensic surveying, using GPS coordinates to document every single car that parked on my property during peak usage hours. The data was devastating. 43 vehicles regularly trespassed on my land, including Brenna's BMW, which occupied the same premium spot every single day. But my secret weapon was the quiet alliance I'd been building with reasonable neighbors who were getting tired of Brenna's increasingly unhinged behavior. Sandra Thompson, whose husband worked construction and recognized quality building when he saw it, had started asking questions about Brenna's claims. The Kowalskis, still bitter about their own harassment, were documenting everything Brenna said and did. "People are starting to see through her act," Sandra told me during a chance encounter at the grocery store Wednesday evening. When someone claims every problem in the neighborhood is caused by one person, reasonable people start wondering who's really causing the problems. Thursday brought Brenna's final desperate gambit before our showdown. She'd convinced the sheriff's department to attend Friday's meeting by claiming I'd made verbal threats against community members and might become violent when confronted with legal consequences for my actions. Sheriff Martinez, a no-nonsense law enforcement veteran who'd probably dealt with more real criminals than Brenna had seen in movies, agreed to attend primarily to ensure nothing got out of hand. But his presence would also legitimize whatever happened at the meeting, making it officially witnessed law enforcement business. As Thursday evening descended with the weight of approaching battle, I sat on my dock watching boats bob peacefully in my lake while cars rested silently on my land. Tomorrow night, 47 families would discover who actually owned everything they thought gave their neighborhood its value. Brenna had spent 2 weeks trying to destroy my reputation and mental health before having me arrested for crimes I didn't commit. She had no idea I was about to prove she'd been committing crimes for 3 years. Friday morning arrived with the ominous weight of an execution day, and Brenna had clearly decided to deploy every weapon in her arsenal for maximum psychological destruction before the evening's final battle. At 7 a.m., I discovered her masterstroke. She'd attempted to have me arrested before the meeting could even happen. Sheriff Martinez stood on my front porch holding a complaint warrant, his weathered face wearing the expression of someone who'd been dragged into neighborhood drama against his better judgment. "Mr. Thompson, I have to ask you some questions about allegedly threatening phone calls made to Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his tone suggesting he'd rather be investigating actual crimes than middle-aged neighbor disputes. "She claims you called her house Tuesday night making statements about destroying everything she's worked for and making her pay for what she's done." The accusation was pure fiction, but brilliant in its simplicity. If I'd actually made those calls, they could arrest me before the meeting and paint me as an unstable criminal. If I hadn't made them, which was the truth, it still planted seeds of doubt about my mental state and potential for violence. "Sheriff, I haven't called that woman once since this whole mess started," I said, pulling out my phone records that I'd learned to keep meticulously documented. "You're welcome to verify that with my phone company, but I think you'll find Mrs. Caldwell has a history of making claims that don't match reality." Martinez examined my call logs with the thoroughness of someone who'd learned to separate truth from hysteria through decades of police work. "These records show no calls to her number, ever." "Ma'am," he said into his radio, "the complaint appears to be unfounded. We'll proceed with the meeting as scheduled, but I'll be present to ensure things stay civil." But Brenna's fabricated emergency call was just her opening gambit. By 10 a.m., she'd escalated to bringing in legal muscle that looked like it had crawled out of a television commercial. Her lawyer, a sweaty man in an ill-fitting suit named Bradley Pearson, arrived at the community center early to set up what he clearly believed would be my legal execution. Through the windows, I watched him arranging documents on a folding table like he was preparing for a court trial, complete with a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His presence was designed to intimidate me into surrender before I could present any defense. But Brenna had saved her most vicious attack for the hours leading up to our confrontation. She'd prepared a slideshow presentation that turned character assassination into an art form, using my divorce records, employment history, and carefully edited photographs of my cabin. She'd crafted a narrative that painted me as an unstable drifter who posed a genuine threat to community safety and property values. This individual has a documented history of conflict with authority figures, her presentation claimed, twisting my refusal to pay bogus HOA fees into evidence of antisocial behavior and contempt for community standards. Photos of my rustic cabin were captioned with phrases like structural neglect and potential safety hazard to neighboring families. The slides even included a mock financial analysis showing how my presence allegedly threatened everyone's property values, complete with fabricated statistics about non-compliant properties, reducing neighborhood worth by up to 20%. But while Brenna was busy preparing my public destruction, I was quietly assembling the evidence that would end her reign of terror permanently. My security cameras had captured something beautiful over the past week. Clear footage of Brenna herself trespassing on my property multiple times to take photographs for her slideshow. Video timestamps showed her walking 50 feet onto my land, past Dylan's bright orange boundary markers, to get the devastating cabin photos she planned to use against me. Even better, Garrett's financial investigation had uncovered the smoking gun that would destroy any sympathy she might receive. Bank records showed she'd been depositing HOA legal fund money into her personal account, then paying lawyers a fraction of what she'd collected while keeping the rest for what she'd documented as administrative expenses. Her corruption ran deeper than embezzlement. She'd been running a protection racket, threatening residents with expensive compliance actions unless they paid inflated fees that went straight into her pocket. Dylan had spent the morning creating a GPS-powered presentation that would demonstrate property boundaries in real time during the meeting. His equipment could project exact boundary lines onto the community center walls, showing everyone precisely where their cars were parked relative to my property line. But our secret weapon was the growing coalition of neighbors who'd finally seen through Brenna's manipulation tactics. Sandra Thompson had organized 12 families who were prepared to support reasonable resolution rather than continued warfare. Even some of Brenna's former allies were quietly distancing themselves from her increasingly unhinged behavior. "She's lost credibility with anyone who thinks logically," Sandra told me during a quick phone call that afternoon. "When someone claims they need sheriff's protection from a neighbor who's never even raised his voice, reasonable people start wondering who's really the problem." As evening shadows lengthened across my property, I watched the last cars arrive at the community center, parking on land that belonged to me while their owners prepared to vote on my eviction. Brenna had spent 2 weeks trying to have me arrested, destroyed, and expelled from the community my family had called home for 60 years. Tonight, she would discover she'd been committing felonies while accusing me of misdemeanors. The reckoning she'd demanded was finally here, just not the way she'd planned it. The community center buzzed with the electric tension of a courtroom awaiting a death penalty verdict. 52 residents packed into folding chairs designed for 30. The air thick with nervous anticipation and the lingering smell of burnt coffee from a pot that had been brewing since morning. Sheriff Martinez positioned himself near the back wall, his presence adding official gravity to what everyone expected would be my public execution. Brenna commanded the front of the room like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments in the trial of the century. She dressed for victory in a crisp navy blazer and her most authoritative pearls, armed with her slideshow of destruction and Bradley Pearson sitting beside her like an expensive legal executioner. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the righteous fury of someone about to deliver divine justice. "Tonight we take our community back from an individual who has shown complete contempt for everything we've built together." Her presentation unfolded like a masterpiece of character assassination. Photo after photo of my cabin from deliberately unflattering angles, financial projections showing how my non-compliance threatened everyone's property values, even testimony from neighbors about how my hostile attitude had created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. This person has repeatedly ignored legal notices, violated community standards, and shown complete disregard for his neighbor's safety and financial well-being, Brenna declared, clicking through slides that painted me as everything short of a domestic terrorist. We are dealing with someone who believes rules don't apply to him. The room murmured with appreciation for her thorough documentation. Several residents nodded approvingly as she detailed my supposed crimes against suburban harmony. Bradley Pearson smiled like a shark smelling blood in the water. Therefore, Brenna announced with the dramatic flourish of someone delivering a death sentence, I move that this board authorize immediate legal action, including daily fines of $500 until full compliance is achieved, plus recovery of all legal costs incurred by this individual's stubborn refusal to cooperate with reasonable community standards. The motion was seconded immediately, hands raised around the room in support of ending my reign of terror once and for all. Even Sheriff Martinez seemed to be taking notes, probably preparing to discuss criminal charges after the civil matters were settled. That's when I stood up. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell, for that thorough presentation," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room with the calm confidence of someone about to detonate a nuclear weapon. "I have some information that might interest everyone before we vote on anything." Uncle Morris stepped forward carrying our briefcase of legal ammunition, while Dylan wheeled in GPS equipment that looked like it belonged at NASA Mission Control. The room's energy shifted from certainty to curiosity as residents realized this wasn't going to be the one-sided execution they'd expected. "Before we discuss my alleged violations," I continued, nodding to Dylan, who began setting up his boundary projection system, "I think everyone should know exactly whose property we're talking about." Dylan's equipment hummed to life, projecting precise GPS coordinates onto the community center wall. The display showed an aerial view of our neighborhood with property lines marked in bright colors that couldn't be argued with or dismissed. "According to official county surveys verified this week," I announced as the display showed my property boundaries extending far beyond what anyone had assumed, "my family's land includes approximately 60% of the parking area that this entire community uses daily." Gasps echoed around the room as residents processed what they were seeing. The parking lot they'd been treating as community property for 3 years was mostly my private land. Every single day, dozens of families had been trespassing without realizing it. "That's impossible," Brenna shouted, her composed facade cracking like thin ice. "That parking area belongs to the community. We've been maintaining it for years." "Actually," Uncle Morris said, stepping forward with the gentle authority of someone who'd been winning property disputes since before most of these people were born, "maintaining someone else's property without permission doesn't establish ownership. It establishes trespassing with improvements." But I wasn't finished dropping bombshells that would reshape everyone's understanding of reality. "There's something else you should know," I continued, watching Brenna's face cycle through confusion, anger, and dawning horror. "The lake that gives this community its name, its property values, and its entire identity, according to state water management records, that's privately owned too." The room fell completely silent except for the hum of Dylan's equipment and the sound of 47 property owners realizing their paradise might not be what they thought it was. "Every boat in that water, every swimming party, every fishing trip, you've been using my family's private lake for 3 years while your HOA collected fees for access to water that belongs to me." Sheriff Martinez straightened up, suddenly very interested in the legal implications of what he was witnessing. Bradley Pearson looked like he was calculating how quickly he could distance himself from a client who'd just been exposed as either incompetent or fraudulent. "Every boat slip fee you've paid," I announced, looking directly at Brenna, whose pearls seemed to be choking her. "Every lake access charge, every dollar you've spent for the privilege of using this water, you've been paying the wrong people." The mic drop moment arrived with devastating precision. "Mrs. Caldwell, you've been trying to evict me from property I own while running an illegal commercial operation on a lake that belongs to me." The room exploded in chaos as 47 families realized their property values, their lifestyle, their entire community identity depended on the generosity of the man their HOA president had been trying to destroy. The chaos that followed my revelations could have powered a small city. 47 property owners suddenly realized their entire lifestyle depended on the man their HOA president had spent months trying to destroy. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a surveyor's chain. Sheriff Martinez stepped forward as voices rose and accusations flew, his presence restoring enough order for rational discussion. Folks, let's focus on solutions instead of blame, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd mediated more neighbor disputes than a daytime television judge. Brenna sat in stunned silence, her carefully constructed authority crumbling like a sandcastle at high tide. Bradley Pearson was quietly packing his briefcase, probably calculating how to avoid malpractice charges for representing a client who'd been unknowingly operating an illegal commercial enterprise. That's when I offered the olive branch that would transform our entire community. I know this is shocking news, I said, addressing the room with the calm confidence of someone who held all the cards but didn't want to play solitaire. But I'm not interested in revenge or destruction. I'm interested in creating something better for everyone. Uncle Morris distributed copies of our proposed community agreement, terms so reasonable that refusing them would make anyone look insane. Parking fees reduced from $0, because they'd been trespassing, to $25 monthly per household. Lake access dropping from the HOA's $200 annual extortion to $100 yearly per family. Boat slips cut from $200 monthly to $75. These rates are significantly below market value for private lake communities, Morris explained, as residents read terms that would actually save them money while giving them legal access to everything they'd been using illegally. Additionally, Mr. Thompson proposes establishing a community improvement fund using surplus revenues to benefit everyone. The vote was 46 in favor, with only Brenna abstaining, probably because she was calculating how quickly she could flee the state before anyone pressed criminal charges for embezzlement. Within 3 weeks, our new Lakeshore Community Association had replaced the corrupt HOA with something resembling actual democracy. Brenna quietly moved away after the state attorney general's office began investigating her financial management, her house selling at a 20% loss that became the neighborhood's only property value decrease. The transformation was remarkable. I used the community fund revenues to install proper lighting and drainage for the parking area, creating the kind of amenities the HOA had promised but never delivered. We established a public beach area where families could enjoy the lake without trespassing on individual properties. Annual lake cleanup and fish stocking programs turned our water into a model of environmental stewardship. The financial benefits extended beyond my property. When the county reassessed everyone's property values based on legitimate lake access agreements, most families saw their tax burdens decrease while their actual property values increased due to legal certainty about community amenities. But the real victory was personal healing and community building. Neighbors who'd been afraid to speak up during Brenna's reign of terror began volunteering for improvement projects. The Kowalskis repainted their garden shed in colors that made them happy instead of bureaucratically approved beige. Chuck Martinez's flagpole became a source of pride instead of violation notices. My cabin renovation used sustainable materials and community-friendly design that honored my grandmother's legacy while contributing to neighborhood beauty. Several neighbors volunteered their professional skills. Sandra's husband did electrical work, the Petersons landscaped the new beach area, even some of Brenna's former supporters helped with dock repairs. The most meaningful outcome was establishing Opal's Environmental Scholarship Fund using surplus community fees. The program provides college assistance for local students studying conservation, environmental science, or sustainable development. 3 recipients have already been selected, carrying forward my grandmother's wisdom about being good stewards of the land we temporarily inhabit. Our annual Lake Days Festival has become a regional attraction, bringing together multiple neighborhoods for celebration of community cooperation over litigation. Local newspapers featured our story as a model for resolving HOA disputes through research, documentation, and good faith negotiation instead of expensive legal warfare. Property values throughout Lakeshore have stabilized at their highest levels ever, proving that cooperation builds wealth better than conflict. Several similar communities have adopted our governance model after their own battles with overreaching HOA officials. As I sit on my dock watching sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson, surrounded by the sounds of children playing at our community beach and neighbors sharing evening conversations, I understand what my grandmother really left me. Not just property, but the opportunity to build something better than what came before. Now it's your turn to share the battle scars and victory stories. Drop your HOA nightmare experiences in the comments. I read every single one, and your story might become my next episode exposing how regular people can defeat bureaucratic bullies with proper research and determination. And if you love seeing everyday heroes outsmart corrupt systems through clever legal tactics and community building, smash that subscribe button. We're creating a movement of people who refuse to be pushed around by petty tyrants with fake authority.
From all of us here at HOA Stories, thanks so much for watching today's HOA Karen Meltdown. If you enjoyed seeing neighbors stand their ground and karma catch up, smash that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss the next HOA drama we bring you.